What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in. Today's video, we're going to be doing tabletop review of the CGS Group Mod9 full-size suppressor. This is a 9mm type suppressor. It is a pistol suppressor. That means it's going to attach to your pistol via a piston inside of a booster housing. You can, of course, use it on a carbine as well. You're typically going to either put a lockout or a direct thread mount or switch to a 3-lug mount. Very, very common pistol suppressor. Another very common one out there is going to be the Obsidian. So we're going to be looking at the Obsidian as well in some regards because the constructions are similar, the cones are similar, but they're very different and the approaches actually are fairly decoupled from each other. You just watched our little preview from what our previous video was doing our new ranking system, okay? I wanted to make sure we had a ranking system just like we do with our rifle cans because we've done a ton of different stuff leading up to all of this that we need to be able to really draw conclusions from. We can look at the construction of the cans, how the cans did. We can look for patterns. We can do all types of things and see, even if at the most basic level, just how one particular can does. Form 1s, Form 4s, everything. The construction, science, suppressors, it doesn't matter who made it. It's all relevant. So that said, what are we going to do today? We're going to break this down. We're going to look at, what's the bore size? What are the clips? What are the materials? What kind of spacing does it have? How does it all kind of fit together? We'll get some stills, some close-ups of everything so you can really see what things truly look like in a lot better detail. Even better than probably if you were at the gun store and had this can in your hand. So that's the goal today. All of this is going to help, pick out some of the differences from what the Obsidian was like. That's another big goal of mine today. Then this is also going to quantify everything for us because then we can go and we can shoot Resilient Suppressors RSP and have a nice wide data set to compare to, okay? Because this kid's pretty impressive, especially in person. I wanted to have it out this Friday. Mod 9 is going to have to come before that. It just makes sense to me. Also this Friday, we'll have the live stream. It's on YouTube every Friday, typically, unless something's come up. 6 p.m. Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona time, so it's a little bit of a time zone difference in a lot of places. That would be, depending on daylight savings, it'll be either 9 p.m. Eastern or sometimes 8 p.m. Eastern, depending on the time of the year. But Resilient Suppressors will be on. That'll be our guest. You'll be able to ask them anything. Yes, the review won't be out, but you can still ask them pretty much anything you want. They're also really big into the comm block stuff, so you can ask them questions about that, and or what they've got up and coming. And it could just be anything. They can give you any suggestion they want, just like our interview with OCL. So that went really well. Hopefully this one was well. Hopefully the audio will be a little bit better this time. I'll make sure to wear headphones this time. Sorry about that. And yeah, so if you guys aren't familiar, just to kind of recap, we do have that ranking video up. It's got all the descriptions of a lot of cans on it, but we're gonna update the master post and add a lot of this to it. Towards the bottom, after all the muzzle device and mount stuff, is the pistol can section, 9mm pistol cans, 22s in this section as well. I do have some more 22 content I want to get pushed out. It's probably not going to be till in September, I think, but just with how everything's scheduled at the moment with these two runs. Hopefully we have another rifle can to do before then that I've been dealing with, and we got another research supplement to do off of all of that venting data. But I have not forgotten about it because I know some of you have asked me about it. But long story short, there's now a ranking section, so that is where it is, since I didn't get to cover that, I think, in the ranking video. And they'll just be underneath here, as we add more and more cans and more data. So, hopefully this makes sense. So why don't we go ahead, we'll head over to the tabletop portion of this whole deal, and we'll look at the Mod9, we'll break it down, and we'll see what happens here, and then we'll get our AutoCAD and we'll model the sucker. So, welcome to the Science for Student Tabletop. Here's what we got. We've got a box that almost looks like a tackle box. Now, I'm kind of partial to people's packaging, so I like to see what it looks like. So, for an example, here's how my Obsidian came. Pretty nice packaging. Dead Air, always on point with their packaging. A lot of places really on point with their packaging. This isn't terrible. It's kind of reminiscent to how my Odessa came. It came in a small case as well. I might even actually have it here. I do. But notice, I mean, it's like a little bit more filled out, right? So I might just be making a big deal out of nothing, which is basically exactly what I'm doing. But I do like to point out the finer points when I can. You pop this sucker open, and you've got a Mod9 in all of its glory. Now, this has been one of my favorite cans. I'm very nostalgic over this can. I like CGS Group a lot. They're sort of close by. They're in New Mexico, so just one state over. And, you know, I mean, I like what they're doing. I like that they are putting effort in, right? To do stuff that's different than a lot of other places are doing. Whether you consider it new or not, you know, it kind of depends. But this is basically one of my favorite all-time cans, or at least this cone style is, for sure. It's one that I've emulated and tried to improve upon and had some success with that. So it's only fair we get this guy on the channel, especially since the Mod9 is arguably one of the largest selling pistol cans currently. That's gonna be with the Obsidian as well. So they're, you know, pretty much the Mod9, the Obsidian, you could say maybe the Wolfman, but that's more carbine. Some of the YHM stuff, also more carbine than anything, are some of the really go-to cans. What's serial numbers on this guy? That's one thing I haven't looked at. So let's see, we got 3,152. So, you know, if you think that they started with one, well, then they've probably got a couple thousand out there at least. I want to say my rugged was in the 2,867. So who knows? Maybe their Mod9 has outsold the rugged. I have no idea. Total speculation. We did the full review on the Obsidian. You guys can watch that. But I do want to, since there's such a close can in comparison in a lot of different ways, I do want to mention little things throughout as we go. But long story short, let's start off with a size comparison. So if we kind of match them up here, I have the piston out of this one. It's actually sitting back there. But it would line up about with the tube right there. So Mod9 is going to be shorter than the Obsidian. So do keep that in mind when we are looking at the data, okay? Obsidian and the Mod9 are more or less the same diameter. They're very, very similar cans for the most part. Both have this very good, distinct grip on the back. I would say the Obsidian has a better grip here on the back, and you kind of need that more because of the modularity of the Obsidian, where the Mod9 is not modular, okay? Now for me, that is not a big deal at all, because honestly, every modular can I have, it pretty much is gonna stay in one configuration. Now there are people out there who might buy a full-size modular can, go to the shorter configuration, and use it in that shorter configuration more often. They're just people who probably would have been better off buying the shorter version of that can then. No big deal. I get everyone's different. Some people see modularity as a selling point and some don't. For me, it's more of a hindrance than anything. I really personally don't like modularity. I personally prefer something that is not. So if you're not familiar with the diameters here, it's dog boned. So we've got this area relieved, this area relieved. And the fat areas, which are going to be the main parts that, you know, you've got to be able to see over, we're basically it's 175 tube stock, and that can come, you know, plus minus 2 thou a lot of times, typically on the overage side. So Then they go and they've relieved, some of the outer parts. They've went to a 17.4 area here that is for the blast chamber area. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs that strength for blast purposes so much, especially when you're only shooting 9mm. Now, when you're going to try to use the thing on, say, 300 blackout subs, which it is rated for 300 blackout subs, having even 17.4 isn't totally necessary. What it's mainly there for is boosters take a beating, okay? You've got reciprocating parts. This piston is moving back and forth inside here. So you've got the can kind of slamming against each other, this 17.4 piston. So that's where it really comes into being more necessary than anything. If you've ever used an aluminum housing like these STTA housings, man, they wear out quick. This is an old Form 1 can. I grabbed it just to kind of show some scale here, but I don't know how well that's going to show up, but they're roughly about the same diameter. This one's going to be a little tiny bit smaller. I think this is 135 if I remember right. Nope. I don't remember right. 126 basically. So pretty small. But as you can tell, I mean, they don't look that much different. But anyway, I digress. Mod9, our Form 1 can, our Obsidian. We've got the Odessa, full-size configuration. Gonna be long. I mean, look how much longer that is when we look at it lengthwise. We go from a height comparison. There you go. You can see that RSP there in the background. Look how small that little guy is in comparison. So let's take a look at some weights. We've got a weight of, don't roll away. Maybe go, no, we can't do that. There we go. 9.957 ounces. So if you're not familiar with the construction, the only part that's 17.4 is going to be our piston and our booster blast chamber area. I want to say everything else include. The only thing I'm not sure about is the cap. I'm pretty sure the cap's aluminum as well. Everything else is going to be 7075 T6 aluminum. The first baffle is going to be 17.4 as well, and that's really all you're going to need in most, especially on a pistol. On a pistol, that's all you're going to need. If you're going to go using on carbines and stuff, well then, and doing some full auto and stuff, okay, then you might want 2, maybe 3 baffles that are 17.4. You'd be extremely surprised how much punishment, when we're talking 9mm, even in full auto, an aluminum can deal with, because we're not a lot of gas volume. We're not a lot of powder. We're not a ton of pressure. And therefore, we have a lot more trouble building up excessive heat. And heat's what really does it, as well as the particulate matter from our unburnt powders, and just, whatever happens from burning the powder, you get little particles and stuff, but that doesn't matter for so much right now. Basically, I mean, the can, even though it's an aluminum construction, I would not let that fool you to think in any way that is an issue. The vast majority of 9mm pistol cans, and just 9mm cans in general, have been some combination of either all aluminum or aluminum and another base metal in the areas that it needs that type of metal. So this is an example of that. The RSP will be another example of that when we review that. Now the Obsidian, on the other hand, same kind of deal. Everything is aluminum, same type of aluminum, just we've got all 17.4 cones. So, I mean, going to be quite a bit heavier too because of that. 11.6-ish, so there you go. For length, if we go right to the end of the tip to the end here, I already did pull the cap off just now, which will stick out just a tiny bit. But your 7 ends about right here, so we've got about 6/10 to 7/10 of an inch past 7 inches, so right in line with basically what's advertised. Our cap is going to be a rimless cap, meaning there is no rim. It's infinitely variable on its depth. Only limiting factor is going to be the depth inside of the threads in the tube, as well as, of course, if there's something obstructing it, like the skirt of a cone. You'll see that we do have a bit of a I don't know if you want to call it cone or not, but you can see we do have a nozzle going on here. There is a bit of a radius, something to point with. A radius base right here before we then get into another little radius. I'm not sure what they've tested in that regards or whatnot, or if anything at all. This radius area or domed area, whatever you want to call it, has then been relieved with little holes here on the backside. And then we've got a star shape in the face. You're gonna have a little tool that fits into these little holes. It's silver. I've misplaced it, I think. I'm not 100% sure where I've put it. Or I'd show it to you guys, but not too big of a deal. It'll be in the case when you guys get it or buy it, if you do buy it. Other than that, I mean, not like anything too exciting going on here, other than the fact that the last cone does snap over and seal pretty well up against the cap. So all of the cones are pretty kind of deceiving if you've never dealt with them before. Now it does look like carbon's wiping off this anodized finish pretty well, so that's nice. But basically it's a cone just like any other cone. It's got a skirt in the back, and then all they've done is they've also put skirt in the front. So they could, in theory, cut the skirt off the front and just add it to the back if they wanted to and achieve the exact same thing, minus on the distal cone. So why they've chosen to do it this way, I have no idea at all. It's just what they chose to do. So here's the cone. If you want a closer look, you're going to be able to see we've got a traditional radiused curved cone. Okay. Now that said, I want to highlight something. Not every radius is going to be the same. So you can have a radial cone, but they're not still all created equal, because there's an infinite amount of ways you can adjust this radius to different sizes. They have chamfered the aperture. That's a good thing. That's something going all the way back to at least the Joe Godini days, so that's at least 20 years. I do like chamfering, especially if you do have a wider tip. So something Obsidian should have paid more attention to if they could have. Fairly narrow clips. I mean, look at the clip's pretty narrow in relation to the bore. Now, if you look at that clip, it does appear that it has been cut off center a little bit. Whether that's intentional or not, I am not sure. We will know when we get kind of the rest of our cones out of here. I have a feeling it was not intentional, but it's really not the end of the world. Let's see if you can see it a little better for the backside. Yeah, it's not too much. It doesn't take much for it to look kind of funny, but you can definitely tell. I think that'll pick up on camera. What's the magic in these? Well, you know, it's a combination of things. It's proportional. It's how much of a pocket they've added. Now we've got this big pocket, right, for gas to collect in. Okay. It's how much radius they've used. It's the fact they've gone and taken the time to chamfer. They've made the mouth not too wide. Something very different than, say, what the Rugged did. We'll go ahead and pop one of these out even just to compare. So, I mean, here's Rugged. And you'll notice how much wider that face is. Okay. Our radiuses are very similar, but we are flared out way more at the bottom, which is going to change the shoulder portion of our radius. I don't know how well that's going to show up on camera for you guys. We're going to have a much larger clip on our Rugged cones. So all around, you can see pretty easily the difference. Now here you highlight too what I was talking about with the skirts. All they've done is add a skirt on the front. So just imagine if the skirt continued up the front, it would look very similar. Now we'll get into more detail when we get into AutoCAD. So one of the big pet peeves of mine is trying to manage when you are going to do a pocket cone like this, especially in 9mm. How much of this area, how wide of an area do you make here? Because the bigger area you make here, the narrower you have to then make back here, right? So there's this fine balance you have to find and try to achieve. Now, as far as the clips, very similar to what we do on a lot of Form 1 cones. It's kind of our starting place. 1/8, it's almost probably a 1875 end mill, though this is coming in a little under that. It could just be because I doubt, I mean, then, yeah, it's, you know, maybe a little worn out or something. Depth. That or it's metric. Maybe they used a metric and there's something close metric on it. 244. So right there, you know, we recommend probably a 235-ish to 220, 235-ish to start and then go from there. If you look from the back side, we get our kind of our half moon looking clip there. So that's one way to quickly eyeball if you are at least close to how deep you should be. It gets a little bit more complex than that, but this is a starting place. They could probably even go a little bit bigger on these clips and potentially pick up some performance, mainly in a touch of depth possibly and a little bit of width, but that's also variable too. Now, we've got all of our cones out of there. One thing you're gonna notice is there aren't that many of them. We have a ton of them in the obsidian, yet we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There should be at least one more. Yep, there it is, our blast cone. 7, so. Voila, that is your baffle stack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you want to try to count what's on your cap, though, that really isn't. You're gonna notice we have plenty of distal volume here. One thing that I did find that was interesting, no interlocking, nothing to keep these cones centered or anything. You're just supposed to stack them up, slide them in, and tighten down the end cap and align them that way. That can sometimes be a problem for some of us, but everything fits and finishes really, really well. They're really easy to stack up and align. And then when you couple in how this cone or cap interacts with the stack, that basically when everything snaps together, even if you do spin this, the whole stack kind of will spin together and keep everything aligned. So I found that to be pretty interesting. The anodizing is going to help with that quite a bit, and the fact that nothing in here is like overly tight. All the cones do snap together, not super duper tight. Like you can see, I was able to break them all apart real easily. But I mean, they are going to get a little bit of carbon in them eventually, no matter what. That's just going to happen. But it's all basically the same cone. Let's see if we can look at the clips on some more of these. Yeah, they're all a little crooked. That one looks like it's kind of cockeyed like that. I've had this thing apart multiple times, and I've actually, the first time I've noticed that one's not too bad. But yeah, so I mean, there you have it. The only one that's going to be any different is the fact they've not put a skirt on the front of the blast cone. So you're always going to know this one's the blast cone just by the fact that it doesn't have that skirt there. Instead, they've used in a spot inside of the tube here for that to sit against and locate. Now, it is going to be a buried tip piston kind of can. We've gone over that pretty heavy, but we'll talk about that more when we get to our AutoCAD model. The big thing about the Mod 9, other than its cone and proportions and stuff, is going to be the piston. A lot of the performance is picked up from this piston. I know I've hit the piston thing pretty hard, but I'm going to reiterate it once again because it's relevant, of course, to this video. You're going to have a seal that is serviceable. You do need to keep this thing greased. I use a pretty expensive grease, but white lithium grease will work just fine. Make sure you grease your piston. Nothing too special about any of this, but the piston itself is just, I mean, it's the same as a silencer co. Okay. The body's the same, minus the stupid freaking groove sound circle. Just disregard those stupid things. But then they've gone and they've added 2 more points to it. So there's more points. It's a thicker portion here. And then they've done something extremely unique, which we've talked about pretty heavily. They've added these basically these scoops, these ports. That gas is going to be forced up and into and backward, and they've done a big taper on the mouth here. So unlike the Obsidian, where the first cone is got a tip that is, where did I put those? Super wide, no chamfer, no nothing. Then once it fits in, it literally, closes off the entire bore. Nothing can get by, until this piston starts to move backwards and decouple. They did something completely different. They actually addressed this, I think, the way it should be done. If you are going to do this, they've redesigned the piston. I don't like that they went to 12 points though. If they would have left 12 or 10 points, then you could be using this piston on literally any can. But that also might be something they didn't want people to be able to do. Who knows? I don't know. So I've had to go and custom make things. But basically, the tip of this first cone recesses in the piston, but you can see how it's not nearly as big of a deal because of the design, right? So now I do find that the ports on here definitely help suppression, especially in subs, especially shots like 2 or 3, but it doesn't tend to always last. When you get enough rounds in a string, you start to see the decibel levels creep up a little bit. But other than that, I mean, that's completely normal. Every single can does that. So it still overall tends to work pretty good. And it does it with a lot less cones than everyone else. So you could really redesign this thing, probably get a cone or 2 more in it, and be even better if they wanted to go back to the drawing board. But I know they're extremely focused on introducing more of the Hyperion style to their suppressors. So I doubt we're going to see that. The one thing I will say is, because of the construction of these cones, how tall and deep the pockets are and such, that when you get into the shorter versions of the Mod 9, like the SKs and stuff, you're only getting like a few cones, like very few cones, and those cans tend to be a little bit louder than what you probably want. That's where I bet you the Obsidian definitely has an edge with its design. So that said, both cans very, very similar. Each one has a different approach on a few different things. We'll see how they do suppression wise, but now you kind of know everything to keep in mind. So I pretty much think we've covered everything we need to here on the tabletop. So why don't we go ahead, hop on the AutoCAD, and we'll look and kind of see how this all lays out inside and talk about that just a little bit. Oh, I did forget to do a few things, didn't I? I forgot to give you guys dimensions of the cones. So let's do that, because I know that's going to be something you guys want to see. So remember, they're 7075 T6 aluminum. They're anodized. We've got a 12790D. A little bit bigger than what our Obsidian has. The bore. Right where my minimum is. I like to run about a 0.4 bore, 0.406. So we're right there, basically right in line. Our skirt thickness, we're at 35 thousandths of an inch. Our height from basically the base of the radial, this is going to be a very rough measurement here. About 360 thou tall, so I mean, it's a pretty short radial, nothing too crazy. The depth of the pocket, now that's going to be a little weird because the bottoms are not flat, but It's somewhere around 3/10 of an inch for all intents and purposes. The width of the area here, about 940. So you can do the math. You can take the total OD, subtract 940, divide by 2, and you'll get how much from here to the wall. Then subtract your skirt thickness of 35 thou, and you'll figure out exactly how wide this pocket is. So hopefully math's not too hard for you all to accomplish. Now, skirt length, 700 and about 28 thou. So hopefully you'll be able to see in here, but very similar to the Obsidian. I don't think we need to borescope it, but we've got a cage just like the Obsidian has, very similar in pretty much all regards, with some little changes on like the porting and where the teeth of the piston sit. So you would think there'd be 12 teeth, 12 spots for it to sit, but instead they do 2 teeth to a spot. So I'll try to get in there. Hopefully that makes sense. See, 2 teeth right there. So I don't know if you guys know this, but when you can take your can and you can pull it forward and twist it and index and find a spot where you get the least amount of point of impact shift. So also what's happening when you're shooting, you know, this piston is decoupling out of those and recoupling back in. So there's nothing to keep it from spinning when it's in the decoupled state, yet the suppressors always manage to recouple pretty much just fine. There's some funny jokes about how the O-ring hole, yeah, just stupid stuff that some people have said in the past, but yeah, there's nothing really holding it. Okay, so now that we've done our little PS there, why don't we go ahead and look at AutoCAD. All right, so the Mod 9 is made up of basically all one style of cone. The first cone, though, is going to be 17.4, and then they do leave this upper skirt off right here. We've already seen this in person, but hopefully now it'll kind of make maybe a little bit more sense if it wasn't already. The first cone is going to be this one over here on our far left side. You can see we've got a radius, you can see our clip, you can see our chamfered tip. You can see the coaxial areas here, or I shouldn't call it a coaxial area. You should see the pocket areas. Technically it is co-located to the axis, but whatevs. Anyway, it's really not that typically of like a very complex shape. It's really well thought out for the most part, and they've done a lot of like little subtle things that I think are missed in some other cans. And what do I mean by that? Things like this chamfering here on the back side of this far right cone, for example. The chamfering here on the front of the cone. The fact that they made this a radius bottom and not just a straight bottom. You know, it's like these little things. The fact we've radiused these inner corners over here. Like, it's really one of the reasons why this has been, to date, one of my favorite cans, is there's just been some very good attention to detail on things. And details add up. They absolutely add up. You know, so we talked about that a little bit with the relationship with the cone to the, you know, the piston. Like, it's that type of thinking that I really, really like. Okay, now if you want, we can go ahead and dimension some things here for you guys. We already did outer diameter, which would be, you know, from like, you know, let's zoom in on one of these main ones, like from here to here. So we're not going to do that, but we can, you know, we can look at like overall length. So overall length, we're at about 734 thou plus or minus, let's say. Our actual, where our normal skirt would be, right, would be from down here to roughly about somewhere right in here. So that would be about 3.5, right? But then you add on this forward section. So when it's stacked together, it makes a much longer chamber than what it kind of meets the eye here in the image you see. Now, the pocket's pretty deep. You've got I mean, again, it's radius, so it's not like we can call a perfect bottom here, but it's about 330. Let's just call it 330. Keep it a nice whole number. We've already talked about our clip width and our bore and things of that nature. If you want to know what, because we couldn't do it before, what the portion is across here, we're at about 940 thousandths of an inch. So that makes our actual usable pocket roughly 0.1375. So not bad. Not bad at all. The big thing, though, when you do something like this, like I was saying before, you have to balance what is inside versus what is on the backside. So, backside here, we've managed to keep 873 thousandths wide. So, not terrible. Not terrible, not exactly great either, but if you think of something like our Dead Air Odessa with its 1.1 inch outer diameter, what do you think the backsides of those cones is going to be? More than likely, even smaller than what we have here when you factor in everything, or probably roughly about the same. So, I would personally, if for you guys Form 1ers, use this as sort of a guide on what the minimum on a 9mm can backside width should probably be if you do try to approach something like this. The tip is also very important, right? The tip of this cone, not anywhere near the 0.6 of an inch we were dealing with rugged. So if you go just to the chamfered edges, we're at 466. Still a little bit more than what some of us might be used to. Now, if you do go from the chamfered edges, 568. So still underneath where the rugged cones would be. And honestly, this is the one feature that I think the rugged cones are really, really missing, is at least this chamfer here to help, and a little bit more blast chamber, or switch to the different piston or something of that nature. And I think you'd end up having really quite a bit better can than what it sits at right now. Now, Mod 9 doesn't have a ton of cones. It's actually not very many at all. When you stack it all up, you get something that basically looks like this. You've got your clip, so imagine your clip coming over here. You've got your flow down the center of the can, and you basically are, a fairly smooth pathway in. We've got gas that's going to collect down in the bottoms of these pockets. You've got a decent pathway out. And this brings me to kind of what I was talking about before on the backside and how they took the time to chamfer out the backside. If you look closely, you get this, You get this nice lane. Look at that. Look at that nice lane that they've formed there for gas to get in, gas to be able to get out. I mean, it's still a little bit tight, but it's not very tight at all. Now, if it was spaced closer together, yeah, we would start getting, it would be definitely a little bit harder for gas to flow in there for sure. So this also then couples to why probably they use this longer spacing. Look how perfectly the tips of these cones end up with the backside of the other cones. None of this is by mistake. This is by clear, thought out processes. You're also going to, where you have this cone here, imagine you're getting the most expansion this way, but then you're getting forced into here as well when you get to this cone. So imagine this tip being up here in the butt of this cone. Now you're getting very small little bits of area here on this side. So, I mean, for this exact cone, the way they've dimensioned it, I mean, they've laid it out pretty much exactly how I would lay it out, which is cool to see. I probably would change a couple things. That way I could get probably 1 to 2 more cones in this can. But, I mean, they've really hit all of the high points, in my opinion, however much that opinion is worth. If you're not familiar with with the pockets and such, I mean, you have ambient gas inside the can, right? There's pressure, there's gas, the air is fluid, okay? So when we get our nice jet and everything, that ambient gas that already exists, it has to go somewhere. So it does get pushed into these corners, right? While our incident gas comes in and presses against it and pressurizes these chambers. Gas takes the easiest path possible, the path of least resistance. It moves from a high pressure area to a low pressure area. It's called a pressure differential. Part of this is going to have a bullet. So as the bullet is flying through here, it's going to occlude the bore. You've got to utilize that moment as best as possible to do as much work as possible, because once that bullet leaves the can, you're not going to have nearly as an efficient can after that as you do when the bullet is still in the suppressor. So, what does it all get us? It gets us, what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cones. And performance that basically is going to probably match many cans out there with many more, cones stuffed inside of the can. So they've done a good job for what they have to work with here. The distal portion of the can, you can see again where the end cap right here in these corners is going to lock in with the last cone in the stack. You see that here. You can see how we have a nozzle on the back of our cap. So as everything comes out here, we have plenty of distal volume in this chamber right here. Not like a ton because of the nozzle and stuff, but there's still absolutely as much as we could really hope for. At some point, we really need to do some testing on the channels with things like cap, features and things of that. But for now, we haven't publicly done anything. But here you go. Again, it's just the devil's in the details, right? The devil's in the details, and it's pretty cool to see what they've put together here. Hopping over to the blast chamber side, this is where a lot of the magic comes from. Our piston, right? As our gas comes out of our muzzle, it gets pushed, it gets forced in and tumbles into our housing. That is something where normally we don't have that. Normally we just have some vents. We just have natural expansion at that point. Here they are forcing a condition in some ways, right? Now this does tend to, I think, lead to a little bit more back pressure in the can though. It's a bit of a trade-off, I think. I think this has a little something to do with some of the reports about it being a little gassy as well. And of course, the relationship of the piston to the first cone plays a part in that as well. Being we do have this big buried tip cone. The difference here is going to be that they have sectioned the mouth of their piston to accept it, right? So as this piston slides backwards, or the more room is going to take place here. But I know it does look a little bit tight, but it's not actually as bad as this kind of appears. I tried to show you guys that on the tabletop portion, but this, is something we've tested on our own channel. We've seen the piston contribute additional suppression, especially in the first few shots. We've seen the buried tip kind of have hit or miss results though, so I'm not necessarily convinced that doing this buried tip is the best thing. Actually, the best can right now on the channel is a CGS piston in a pocket cone can, very similar kind of cones to this, but with a non-buried tip. So take that for what it's worth. We'll look at the data more, after the Mod9 is shot. And there you have it. This is the overall can as it sits in its fully configured realm. So You can go ahead, get your snapshots now, save that to your databases, do whatever you need to do. If you're a can cone image collector like I am, I've got so much images, it's crazy, but there you've got it. That's how the Mod 9 basically lays out, and I wouldn't be doing it any justice if I didn't put it side by side with the Obsidian. So here you can really get a good idea of just how different yet so similar these cans are. I mean, a lot of people get hung up. They look at two different cones, they think the cones look very similar, and that can be the case, but all these little details do make a difference. I've lined up the backs of the pistons, so these are relatively proportional to how everything should be. And here you can see just really how drastically different the approaches are. While the piston stuff is very similar, that's really where it kind of ends. I mean, they've gone and done a lot of different things, but what did it get them? Well, that's to be determined. We will see. I've seen a lot of data, though, on Mod 9 and Obsidian from not myself, and it appears that the two cans pretty much do about roughly the same from a suppression standpoint. And that's impressive. I mean, the Mod 9 is a little bit shorter than Obsidian, right? And again, way fewer cones. I mean, Obsidian 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cones. So, I mean, we are substantially different in cone counts here. Now, that said, I mean, I've kind of talked about how I would maybe possibly do some little bit changes to some of the clipping and such. Maybe get a little bit more aggressive in some areas. But other than that, I mean, it's very much so proportioned well. I did talk about, too, where the Mod 9 might struggle in shorter configurations. So check this out. We don't have very many cones in here. So let's say we went, I don't know, to like a 5-inch suppressor. So 5 inches. Where would 5 inches be? Right there. Okay, so 5 inches gets us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cones. And that's if we don't include the extra distance from the piston sticking out the back. Some cans do. So we do get about the same amount of cones, I guess you could say, in a 5-inch can as we do rugged. When you pull the rugged can apart in its K configuration, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what happens if we divide at the same spot rugged divides at? That would put the cap roughly about right here. So now we get 1, 2, 3, 4 cones out of the Mod 9. So, I mean, in the shorter cans, I tend to find cone count plays a decent part, but it's something to look at as well in the future when we do, test for, say, the Obsidian in the shorter configuration, which I have every plans to do at some point. Now, I don't know that I'll ever buy a shorter version of the Mod 9. I guess it's possible, or maybe someone could loan it to us or something, but if we ever do it, it will be extremely interesting to see if the data sets decouple at all. And I think that about wraps everything up. I mean, I've gone ahead, I've put some of our cans that we've tested up here that we've, from a Form 1 perspective, so you can kind of see, what they look like. They're kind of a mix between Mod 9 and Obsidian. They kind of straddle a bit of a halfway point. Again, though, keep in mind a lot of these cans, I would do some things different. They're just, typical half-inch stacked cans, not really meant to be fully developed. So it is something I want to do in the future, is work out, maybe a couple different 9mm cans with some of the recommendations that I've made in the past for how I tend to actually build them myself, and see what happens. But for now, you at least get a little bit of a glimpse behind how everything looks, and we'll model and talk about these cans more in the future. But for now, we're going to go ahead and sign off here. We're going to meter the Mod 9. We're going to meet back. We'll do our rankings, and we'll see where it lands. Alright guys, so that's it. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.